Sir John Everett Millais, born 1829, died 1896, was one of three founder members of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Pre-Raphaelites, of course, but just to refresh your memories, let's indulge in a little history of the movement before we move on to Millais himself. There's a young Millais. In 1848, three rebellious, high-spirited students from the Royal Academy came together to form the Brotherhood. Along with Millais, they were Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and William Holman Hunt. So I've especially chosen young images of them to give you an idea of what they would have looked like when it all kicked off. Some of their first paintings were in fact signed with the initials PRB, Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. The term Pre-Raphaelite was chosen because it reflected their admiration for Italian painters from the period before Raphael's life. What they admired and hoped to emulate was the honesty and simplicity of these early Christian artists like Fra Angelico, Giotto, Fra Lippo Lippi, for instance. Also, they were absolutely united in their opposition to the prevailing art of the establishment, which they saw as trivial and vulgar. Now, although these three artists were the vanguard of the movement, obviously they collected a lot more adherents to it. People like James Collinson, Ford Madox Brown, Arthur Hughes, Edward Burne-Jones, Henry Wallace. I could go on. Henry Wallace, famous for his painting of the Death of Chatterton, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So many other artists were inspired by the Pre-Raphaelite movement, and they started to emulate their style. So the Enunciation by Rossetti is a good example of Pre-Raphaelite work. As Millais himself put it, they wanted to paint serious pictures faithful to the natural world, which would, quote, turn the minds of men to good reflections, unquote. They used pure color over a white ground, pre-painted onto the canvas, which made their work startlingly bright. They also subscribed to the ideas of the art critic John Ruskin, their main flag bearer, who thought that a good picture should hold a large number of ideas. Though they sometimes dealt with social themes, they mainly embraced the romanticism of tragic love. Many works based on the poetry of the romantic poets or the Arthurian legends to capture a Gothic mood. In a way, they were both modern and medieval at the same time. Through the winter and spring of 1848 to 49, the three artists held regular meetings, and in 1849, three Pre-Raphaelite paintings appeared at the Royal Academy for the first time, two of them by Millais, and they all controversially were signed with the letters PRB. Now, this is Millais' Isabella. This was one of them, and the original is, as are many, actually, is in the Walker Gallery, Liverpool. Also, there's a lot. You'll see as we go on, a lot of Pre-Raphaelite paintings are hung in the Wallis collection in London and the Birmingham Art Gallery, and also Lady Lever's gallery at Port Sunlight. Now, this painting was based on Keats's poem, The Pot of Basil. Isabella and Lorenzo sit at the end of the table on the right. There they are, chatting to each other. While on the left are the three of the, or maybe four, of her wicked brothers, who will later kill Lorenzo. Most of the models for this painting were friends and relations of Millais. So there we have this painting, Isabella. You might think it's a bit staged. We've got this brother here apparently kicking Isabella's dog, and this brother here holding up his glass of with a potion in it, I think. Then this painting was another one of Millais that he submitted, Ferdinand lured by Ariel. So these were the first examples of pre-Raphaelite paintings that the establishment were confronted with. The scene is based on the lines in The Tempest spoken by Ferdinand. The lines were, "Where should this music be, in the air or the earth?" Ariel, who of course is invisible to Ferdinand, is singing while tipping Ferdinand's hat. And Ferdinand, the latter's trying to hang on to it. Millais painted the background on plein air in Shotover Park near Oxford. As per their unwritten manifesto, the Brotherhood was keen to paint outdoors and produce fine detailed work, quote, blade of grass for blade, of which this is typical. Millais wrote of the painting, "You will find it very minute, yet not near enough for nature. To paint it as it ought to be, it would take a month a weed. As it is, I have done every blade of grass and leaf distinct." That's what Millais had to say about it. For his model, he used the art critic and supporter of the group, Frederick Stevens. Notice the green bats in the weird pose of see, hear, and speak no evil. And Millais has achieved the effect of invisibility by using this very thin green wash so that it virtually blends into the background while still maintaining its shape and form. The following year, the Royal Academy took exception to the initials PRB, accusing the artists of setting up a secret and presumptive society. They also took exception to the literary and artistic magazine produced by the group, which was called Germ. The Royal Academy turned its venom particularly on Millais' Christ in the House of His Parents. This painting is in the tape, as you can see. What upset its critics most was the depiction of the Holy Family as ordinary people. They derisively renamed it the Carpenters Shop. The Times declared the painting revolting. Charles Dickens also spoke out against it, calling it mean and repulsive. He described the figure of Christ as, and I quote, a hideous, wry-necked, blubbering, red-headed boy, and the Virgin as hideous in her ugliness. Millais accused Rossetti of leaking the secret of their meetings, and for his part, Rossetti vowed never to exhibit at the Royal Academy again. He did. Nonetheless, in the face of this heated criticism, the group carried on under the leadership of Millais. And at the Royal Academy exhibition of 1851, they were back in force. Enter Ruskin, England's leading art critic, who turned the tide of opinion in the Brotherhood's favour. In the Times, he remonstrated with other critics for failing to appreciate, quote, the finish of drawing and splendour of colour. And he hoped the Pre-Raphaelites may lay in our England the foundation of a school of art nobler than the world has seen for 300 years. Strong words indeed. Ruskin and his wife Effie called on Millais at his home in Gower Street, and their association began. At the 1851 exhibition, Millais submitted these next three outstanding canvases. This one is called Mariana. The stained glass window derived from Merton College Chapel in Oxford. And Mariana from Measure for Measure, as retold in Tennyson's 1830 poem of the same name, rather than the Shakespearean play. Notice the precise attention to detail. The fallen leaves suggest an open window to the left, though we don't see it. Many of the details, such as the mouse, and there's the mouse, are taken from Tennyson's poem. The painting is painted on a mahogany panel primed with a white ground. The Tate tells us, quote, "The paint is thinly applied in some areas to enhance the reflective effect of the white ground, but thickly applied in others. The Mariana's dress is painted with two blue pigments, Prussian blue and ultramarine." Incidentally, it's claimed Millais' painting inspired Mrs. Gaskell's novel Ruth, that she painted in 1853. So there we have a typical Pre-Raphaelite painting with the Gothic mood. The Mariana is holding her back. I'm not quite sure. I'm not familiar with the Mariana story as Tennyson tells it. So she looks as though she might have backache the way she's posed there, but there's obviously a reason for it. And you can see the very delicate, intricate work in the stained glass window. Right, let's move on to the Woodman's Daughter. This was a second of the Millais canvases. The title is taken from a poem by Coventry Patmore. The picture describes how a rich squire's son goes to watch a woodman at work and befriends his daughter by offering her strawberries, which incidentally were purchased at Covent Garden for the purpose of the painting. The background landscape was painted on plein air at Botley Park, Oxford. We're told the girl's boots and lilac pinafore were borrowed from a cottager on the estate. So there we have very colourful, bright painting, making good use of the white background. So the greens are very almost translucent. And then the contrast, we've got this bright red tunic that the boy is wearing. And the most successful part of this painting possibly is the portrait of the woodman's daughter, with her hands held out to receive the strawberries. The return of the dove to the ark, this is in the Ashmolean, was another of the three paintings. Two of Noah's daughters-in-law fuss over a dove newly returned to Noah's ark. An olive leaf has been plucked from its beak. And there is the olive leaf being held there, and there's the dove, obviously, and she's kissing the dove. Ruskin was keen to buy this painting, but he was too late. Somebody else had snapped it up. There's a strong and very obvious allegorical theme here, of course. So I'll just let you absorb that for a second. Now let's turn our attention away from the Brotherhood, which was actually very short-lived. By 1853, after only 5 years, Rossetti was already moving in a different direction, and disagreements between the three painters had sprung up. Millais gradually became disillusioned with the lack of commercial viability of their art and began to concentrate instead on producing work that would sell. So let's focus on Millais for the remainder of this talk. And there is Millais at around about the middle of the century. Millais was born in Southampton in 1829, but most of his childhood was spent in Jersey and the Channel Islands, to which he retained a strong devotion throughout his life. His mother's relatives were prosperous saddlers, and we're told by Millais' biographer, Millais' son, in fact, she had a powerful influence on his early life. She encouraged his art, deliberately relocating the family to London to help develop contacts with the Royal Academy. Millais said later, "I owe everything to my mother." And by the way, his father was a keen amateur painter too, as was his brother William. Millais' brilliant talent was recognized at the very early age of 9, when he won a silver medal from the Royal Society of Arts. At the age of 11, he entered the Royal Academy schools as its youngest student. He first exhibited in the Royal Academy in 1846 with this painting, Pizarro seizing the Inca of Peru. This painting is in the Victoria and Albert Museum, as you can see. I just let you look that for a minute. I've got no observations to make of it. It's an early painting. The tribe of Benjamin seizing the Daughters of Shiloh followed very quickly. In fact, in the same year as he won the gold medal, Millais was only 18 when he painted this painting. I don't know how many of you are aware of the subject matter. I'm going to quote from Wikipedia now because I had to look it up. I had no idea who Shiloh was. The Book of Judges recounts that the rape of the concubine of a member of the tribe of Levi, which would be Shiloh, of course, by a gang from the tribe of Benjamin resulted in a battle at Gibeah, in which the other tribes of Israel sought vengeance, and after which members of Benjamin were killed, including women and children. Almost the entire tribe of Benjamin was wiped out by the other Israelite tribes. So that's the subject matter. There's a lot of action going on in this painting, but it certainly doesn't give any indications as to the Pre-Raphaelite paintings he was to paint later as he grew up. Quite baroque, really, isn't it? This painting, Simon and Iphigenia, and this is in the Lever Gallery in Port Sunlight, attests to his prodigious early talent. Millais didn't use the Decameron as his literary reference, but the John Dryden version of the story. Iphigenia, of course, was Agamemnon's daughter, who he was obliged to sacrifice as told in the Iliad. Millais achieved great success with a Huguenot, which depicts a young couple about to be separated because of the religious conflicts. The woman, who is Catholic, attempts to persuade her Protestant lover to wear a white armband, which denotes allegiance to Roman Catholicism. A small number of Huguenots escaped from the St. Bartholomew Day's massacre in 1572 by wearing these white armbands. His style, with great attention to detail, focuses on the beauty of the natural world. Notice this brick wall behind, painted in great detail, brick by brick, but completely smothered by the vegetation all around it. He painted the background near the River Ure, and he and Hunt were while he and Hunt were living at Worcester Park Farm. He added the figures later in the studio. There's quite a contrast of colours here with the lilac of the man's tunic against the greens and the orange, reddy orange wall. You might consider it a bit. You might consider most of these paintings over sentimentalized. Millais combined the romantic Gothic influence of Rossetti with Hunt's meticulous observation of detail, as seen in Ophelia. Now, I'm sure most of you, or in fact all of you, will be very familiar with this painting, which hangs in Tate Britain. The background was also painted on the River Ure in Surrey. The model, Elizabeth Siddal, posed for it lying fully clothed in a bath, its water kept warm by heating it with lamps from beneath. Nevertheless, Elizabeth, we're told, caught a severe cold, and her father demanded £50 for medical expenses from Millais. It took Millais nearly 4 months to complete the figure alone. Notice again the trademark attention to detail in the foliage and trees and the intricate work Millais did on the dress and the flowers. It's said that Millais painted by the side of the river close to Hunt's house for up to 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, over a 5-month period. He'd established himself a makeshift hut there. Ophelia was bought by the art dealer Henry Farrar for 300 guineas, which equates to £40,000 in today's money. It's now valued at around £30 million. In 1855, he painted The Rescue. This painting's found its way all the way to Australia, as you can see. Millais had witnessed the death of a fireman while tackling a fire. The fire brigade had only recently been nationalised. Notice the transitions of colour in the sleeve of the mother's gown. You can't appreciate it quite so much, but if you're standing in front of the painting, which is roughly 3 foot by 4 foot, you would pick that out, I'm sure. And this was considered very innovative at the time. It doesn't seem to be innovative to us now. Millais' subject matter was developing a social context. Ruskin's wife Effie modelled for this painting the Order of Release. The subject of the picture is the release of a Jacobite rebel from prison after the Battle of Culloden. The wife hands the soldier the release order for her exhausted husband, and he's wounded as well, as you can see. Millais went to great pains to get the details right, including researching the correct tartan. According to Millais, he had great problems with the child, however, who, I quote, seemed so obstinate that she would not do anything I wanted and squalled and foamed at the mouth. At the exhibition, where it was sold for 400 guineas, it proved so popular that a policeman had to be positioned in front of the painting. The Illustrated London News reported Millais had attracted more admirers in his little corner than all the other artists put together. So there we are, vibrant colours again, but a very staged composition, I think you'd agree, and possibly over sentimentalized again. But before we move on, we must deal with Millais' involvement with Ruskin, and particularly his wife Effie. In 1853, Ruskin invited Millais, whom he considered his protege, to join him and his wife for a holiday in Scotland. Millais had been elected an associate of the Royal Academy in that same year. It was there at Glenfinlas that Millais painted the famous portrait of John Ruskin. Ruskin had asked to be painted in front of rocks and water. The painting was actually finished in Millais' studio. But while painting the portrait, and maybe even before that, Millais and Effie fell in love. In any event, the Ruskin marriage was not a happy one and had never been consummated. Effie later wrote to her father that Ruskin, and I quote again here, alleged various reasons for this: hatred of children, religious motives, a desire to preserve my beauty, and finally this last year he told me his true reason, that he had imagined women were quite different to what he saw I was, and that the reason he did not make me his wife was because he was disgusted with my person the first evening, the 10th of April, which was their wedding night, of course. To explain this, it's been said that Ruskin had imagined all women to be as devoid of pubic hair as the classic sculptures he'd studied all his life, and was quite shocked when he saw his wife standing naked before him. There was a much publicized divorce, and after 2 years, the marriage was annulled, and Millais was able to marry Effie. They went on to live happily together and had 8 children. Effie became a powerful promoter of his work and helped him secure many commissions. In 1856, he produced The Blind Girl. This is one of the Birmingham Pre-Raphaelite paintings. The background is a view of Winchelsea, but the models were local girls from Perth, where Effie's parents lived. A tortoiseshell butterfly is seen on the blind girl's shawl, and there it is, implying that she is keeping perfectly still while enjoying the sun. Around her neck, and you can't read it, but because we're too far away from it, but the sign reads, "Pity the blind." Very colourful painting, measuring roughly just under 3 foot by 2 foot. Autumn Leaves followed this painting, painted in Rodney Gardens, Perth, where Millais and Effie lived shortly after their marriage. It is twilight in the garden. The models are 2 of Effie's sisters, Sophie and Alice, while the other 2 are the same girls who posed in the previous blind girl painting. So those are the 2 sisters. They stand out there in dark clothes. Look at the detail that Millais has gone to so much pains to produce the pile of leaves, but it doesn't look to me as though that pile would support itself. It's on the verge of toppling over, I would say. It doesn't look like a 3-dimensional pile to me, but nevertheless, quite impressive. Peace Concluded was painted in that same very productive year. The painting celebrates the end of the Crimean War. Effie has posed as the soldier's wife. The picture is full of telling details. The children are playing with animals from a wooden box in the shape of Noah's Ark. Each animal symbolizes one of the combatants in the Crimean War. The rooster, France, the lion, Britain, the bear, Russia, and the turkey, the Ottoman Empire. The child on the left has just picked a dove. There it is, I think, yes. Has just picked a dove symbolizing peace, while the girl on the right holds her father's medal. There we are, as a counterpose. Despite the divorce, Ruskin was generous enough to champion Millais' works, but he took against Millais' next offering the following year, which he denounced as a catastrophe or a catastrophe. This painting is called The Dream of the Past, Sir Isumbras at the Ford. Right. This painting also can be found in Port Sunlight. True, the horse is too large and the hills too dark, you might think. The background was painted at the Bridge of Erne in Perthshire. A Colonel Campbell modelled for the night, and the boy is Millais' son and biographer, Everett. The sentimental nature of the painting looks forward to a change in Millais' style, but it was heavily satirized in a woodcut by Frederick Sands called A Nightmare, bringing the Brotherhood back to mind. Millais is the knight, Rossetti the child on the rear of the horse, and Hunt is the child in front. The Veil of Rest, which hangs in the Tate, this was Millais' favourite painting. The perspective of the nun digging the grave is so arranged that the viewer appears to be alongside her in the grave. We're told that one October evening, Millais was so taken by the beauty of the sunset that he fetched a large canvas and set to work immediately outside. He painted the bulk of the picture, excluding the figures, outside, as I just said. The setting without the tombstones was Effie's family garden at Bowswell, Perth. Effie recalled the sunset lasted so short a time that he had to paint like lightning. The grave and gravestones were painted later at Kinnell Graveyard in Perth. I'm afraid the reproduction of this is the best I could find. It's when you blow it up, it's quite indistinct. The outlines are blurred. The best I could do for that, I'm afraid. The picture was conceived as a sister painting to Spring. It's also in Port Sunlight. So there we have a group of young women arranged, having a picnic, arranged around this bowl, which is a sort of this vessel, whatever it is. We're not sure what it contains, but it's got a lip on it. It's got a pouring lip on it. But the figures seem to fan out from that. The composition works very well. And again, look at the foliage and the detailed work in that foliage, so typical of Millais and typical of the Pre-Raphaelites, really. I think the grass is more successful. After living in Perth for 6 years, Millais and Effie returned to London in 1861, and Millais was elected to the Royal Academy 2 years later. Millais' style eventually changed. He moved away from the brilliantly coloured, minutely detailed Pre-Raphaelite paintings to a more fluid technique. He explained this change by pointing out that with a family to support, he could not afford to spend a whole day working on an area no larger than a 5-shilling piece. William Morris accused him of selling out to achieve popularity and wealth. Paintings such as the Eve of Saint Agnes, based on the Keats poem, of course, and the Somnambulist, clearly show the influence of both Whistler and Sargent, for whom he was now counting, both of whom he was now counting among his friends. I'll just go back to the previous one, give you a better chance to look at it, and you can certainly see the marked difference in style with these broad brushstrokes and washes, dark colours. Even the dress of the protagonist there is painted in rather muted colours. The somnambulist, not easy to say, slightly more colourful, but the background again very muted. There's no detail in the vegetation or anything like that, and we can certainly see the influence of Whistler if you think of his Woman in White. Perhaps because of their influence, he also began painting young women in 18th century dress, such as Stella, for argument's sake. A lot of detail in her dress here, not so much interested in the background, but certainly a lot of detail, and also in the furniture, in the gilt figure there, the gilt head on the side of the piece of furniture. And then, as well as Stella, there was Vanessa, and again, tremendous amount of detail in her dress, certainly harking back to his Pre-Raphaelite paintings, I think. Except that the background, yet again, he's not too interested in the background. It's just dark, basically a dark background to enhance the brightness of the subject matter. She's holding a letter, but we don't know what it says. His triple portrait, Hearts Are Trumps, was commissioned by the art collector Walter Armstrong. It features Armstrong's daughters Elizabeth, Diana, and Mary. Armstrong intended the painting to raise the social profile of the family. So this is a far more colourful painting, as you can see. But for my money, the creases in the dresses under the table are rather overdone. A bit too much Baroque going on there, or Rococo even, I would think. But where it is very successful, I think, is the detail on the card table, the gilding motifs on the card table are very impressive. So there they are playing. It's quite a large painting, actually, 64 inches by 87 across, which is sort of 6.5 feet by 9 feet, very roughly, something like that. By this time, Millais had moved well away from the ideals of the Brotherhood and was veering towards an appreciation of the old masters, as with a souvenir of Velazquez, painted by one of Velazquez's portraits, inspired by one of Velazquez's portraits. So I'll just let you look at that a moment. This painting is actually in the Burlington House in the Royal Academy. And then this next painting you'll all recognize instantly, The Boyhood of Raleigh. There's Raleigh, of course, the boy in green, sitting there painted in Jacobite or Jacobean costume. Notice the little shipwreck, the toy that they presumably been playing with, and the old sea salt, although not so old perhaps, is telling them a story which is totally engrossing them. Look at the great intense interest on their faces, captured brilliantly by Millais, I think. He's pointing out to somewhere out to sea. We follow the direction of his hand, but of course there's no way of telling what he's actually pointing at. With something that he's spinning a story around, no doubt. This one is called The Northwest Passage. An elderly sailor sits at a desk, his daughter beside him at his knees. She's reading from a ship's log. The title points to the repeated failure of British expeditions to find a navigable passageway round the north of the American continent. The chart is of the northern coast of Canada. It's interesting that he used the adventurer and one-time friend of both Shelley and Byron, John Trelawney, as the model for the old sea dog. It's said that when Trelawney, who was totally teetotal, completely teetotal, saw the painting at the Royal Academy exhibition, he was outraged by the fact that Millais had painted him beside a glass of grog. According to Millais' son, Trelawney complained to his friends, and I quote, "That fellow Millais has handed me down to posterity with a glass of rum and water." Trelawney eventually decided that it was Effie who was probably to blame because, and I quote again, "the Scotch are a nation of sops." Another painting with an historical theme was The Princes in the Tower, and I dare say this is very familiar to you as well. I don't need to elaborate on the story of the princes in the tower, I'm sure. In the 1870s, he concentrated on portraits of the great and good. His fee was usually £1,000 per portrait. It's a lot of money in today's money. This one is of Thomas Carlyle. Millais was unhappy with the painting, we're told, and he didn't finish it. Anne Hunt, a suffragette, nearly finished it for him by attacking it with a meat cleaver in 1913. Great shame, because I think this is a marvellous portrait. It's a wonderful face of a very handsome man in his later years, and staring, intelligent eyes. and certainly hung on to his hair in later life. He got his hands are clasped over a walking stick, which suggests again his advanced years. And I love the background, this sort of Venetian red and dark burnt umber mixture, complementing the dark brown of his clothes. But it's his face. Oh, because of all this darkness, it makes the face stand out completely. On a more frivolous note, he looks to me as though he wants his fingernails cut. This one is of Lily Langtry. Both Millais and Lily had strong Jersey connections, of course. Lily Langtry, known as the name escapes me now, but anyway, she was a fine singer, musical entertainer. Gladstone sat for 5 one-hour sittings for this portrait, remarking in his diary that Millais' ardour and energy about his picture inspire a strong sympathy. He painted Gladstone again in 1885. This, of course, is in the National Portrait Gallery, where you would imagine it would be quite a large painting, 50 by 3 foot across. And if he's painted Gladstone, he jolly well ought to paint Disraeli, oughtn't he? Also in the National Portrait Gallery. Disraeli told Millais, "I am a very bad sitter, but will not easily forego my chance of being known to posterity by your illustrious pencil." I think Millais must have used more than a pencil. Due to Disraeli's failing health, he only sat for Millais on 3 occasions. He died shortly after the painting was completed. This, of course, is Tennyson. Tennyson not wearing his hat for once. His hat is held in his hand. I love the way he gets away with this dark green for his cloak. You don't see many dark green cloaks like that, but it contrasts very well with the oranges that he's put into the background. And again, because it's a dark background, the actual face stands out, doesn't it? Very brightly painted. Millais also achieved great popularity with his paintings of children, notably this one called Bubbles. And this painting was used over and over again for many generations in advertisements for Pears soap. And there we have it. In fact, if you can read the bottom of it, it says it cost £20,000 to produce the first. I'm not quite sure what that word says. Editions, inclusive of £2,200 for the original painting. So the original painting, it cost £2,200 according to that. Millais was attacked in print by the novelist Marie Corelli, who accused him of prostituting his talent to sell Pears soap. Millais wrote to her, pointing out that he had sold the copyright of the painting and so was unable to forestall the company. The child model, and we'll go back to the original one, I think. There we are. The child model was the grandson of Naval Commander William Milbourne James, who later rose to the rank of admiral, but as a consequence of this painting was known as Bubbles for the rest of his life. Another popular child portrait was Cherry Ripe. Millais' style is much more fluid now, as he aims for mood. And this may be time to get your hankies out, everyone. Millais' niece, the subject of the painting, was called Lucinda Ruby, and she posed for this painting shortly before she was tragically killed under the arches of London Bridge Station. The painting was reproduced in colour as a chromolithograph by the newspaper The Graphic and included with its Christmas edition. The image vastly increased the newspaper's sales. Millais soon gained widespread recognition for his ability to capture the essence of childhood, which resulted in several commissions. Here's another, which might return the smiles to your faces, though it was done some years later, Ducklings. This one's found its way all the way to Japan, curiously. Again, Millais is using a dark background, mainly umbers and reds and oranges, and maybe some yellow ochre, in order to enhance the actual figure that he's painting. For his landscapes, and this is where I personally think Millais ought to be remembered more than for any of his other paintings. For his landscapes, Millais travelled to Scotland, where he produced a total of 21 canvases, often painting under difficult conditions. They were not blade by blade paintings with the vivid greens of his earlier Brotherhood canvases, but painted in a more assured, broader style. I'll let you take that in for a moment. It's a very fine landscape, and there is a lot of detail in the grasses at the foreground, but there is a certain coldness, a certain chill coming off this lake, I think, mirrored in the sky. It's a rather wonderful painting, that one. Painted as usual al fresco close to Eppie's family home in Perth, the muted greens, yellows and autumnal browns under a light grey and yellow ochre sky give it a lowering effect. It was last bought in 1991 by Andrew Lloyd Webber for £370,000. Summer at St. Martin's. Again, we got quite a contrast there with these very dark greens and browns in the forefront, and the sun coming through the glade and bouncing off the river or stream in the middle there. A lot of detail again in this particular painting. I don't have too much to say about these paintings, except I think they're rather wonderful, and I'm just pausing to let you look at them. Christmas Eve, this is in private ownership. This is his first full landscape snow scene, and the view is looking towards Merthley Castle. And then Lingering Autumn, this painting hangs at Port Sunlight again. And I noticed the girl carrying the milk churn or whatever it is she's carrying has got bare feet, very wisely, I would say, because this looks an extremely swampy area to me. He's caught that extremely well, although I'm not quite sure what this construction is. It looks to be some sort of a stile, but without a fence anywhere near it. Perhaps it's just particularly deep at that point, and maybe there is a path that goes across it. You can use, I don't know. Interesting. Dew-drenched firs. According to the artist's son Everett, Millais' objective was to capture the morning sun streaming through a clearing of gorse illuminated by droplets of dew, a subject probably never painted before, and one that, as he begun it, he feared might be unpaintable. So he's tried to capture the early morning dew on the foliage there in the middle ground. And the sun is newly up, of course. I was quite daring to use yellows rather than blues to create the effect of distance. but this is his main preoccupation. I think the greens and the yellows work extremely well together there. In 1885, Millais was created a baronet, but his health was dealt a severe blow when he was diagnosed with cancer of the larynx in 1894. He had been a heavy smoker all his life. As a result, he had to suffer a tracheotomy, which robbed him of his speech. A saddened Queen Victoria wrote to him asking if she could do anything to ease his situation. Millais asked that she might now receive his wife, having rejected her previously due to the annulment of her first marriage with Ruskin, which the court had viewed as a divorce. When Millais died at his home soon after in 1896, aged 67, the Queen wrote to Effie expressing the nation's sadness over the loss of, quote, the greatest British artist of his age. Shortly before he died, Millais had been elected president of the Royal Academy, which he was only able to hold for a matter of months. He's buried alongside Turner in St. Paul's Cathedral's crypt. Hunt is also buried there, as are several other painters, including Van Dyck and Sir Joshua Reynolds. And here we have a picture of Millais taking his ease in front of the fire in his family home. Apart from his work, one legacy he left the world of painting was that he had made a decisive impact on the mass production of fine art, which we see around us today. He would often produce paintings on the understanding that his dealers would turn them into prints, thus widening the accessibility of art to the general public. Shortly after his death, the Prince of Wales chaired a committee which commissioned a statue of the artist to be sited at Tate Britain. And there is the statue